Welcome back to Conservative Conversations. I'm your host, Reid.
And I'm Frank.
Today we're going to be talking about the campus protests erupting across the country, and we're also going to be talking about President Trump's immunity case in front of the Supreme Court. So let's get started. But first, listeners, I'd like to remind you to please subscribe on our YouTube channel, and you can also follow us on your favorite podcast platform. We would greatly appreciate it. And to get started, I'm going to talk about the big protests that have been happening across the college campuses in the country. Depending on how you look at it, they're either anti-Israel or protests, or some describe them as
Pro-Palestine.
Pro-Palestine, yes, or even some people say pro-Hamas.
Ridiculous.
Depending on where you're at. And it's certainly spreading across the country. More and more campuses are having them. Even right here in good old Ohio, there was a good bit of protest at Ohio State University with, I think, a couple dozen arrests were made. And of course, most notably, the biggest ones at Columbia University in New York. And the latest news on that I saw shortly before we started recording is that Columbia has said the students must leave or be suspended. But they're not going to bring in the NYPD again to help remove them. Which, to me, like, how is just suspending them going to really work? I bet there's a decent percentage of them not going to care if they're really suspended. And they're just going to stay there in their encampment. So I don't think that's a very good solution at getting them to move off the campus.
Well, I also wonder, I saw a thing, like we've seen before with other of these such protests. I think that they draw some of these, like, professional protesters.
Yeah, the agitators, as they're calling them.
Yeah, and some of them aren't even students at these universities.
Right. Yeah, that was one of the things I saw recently about the arrests at Ohio State was a good portion of them weren't even students.
Well, I'll have to send over the clip. I didn't know you were going to do this segment, but I just saw something right before we came on air, too, where they even interviewed a girl, and they said, "What are you protesting for?"
Oh, yeah, I've seen this one. And, like, the last thing in the clip is she says, like, I wish I was more educated.
Yeah,
I wish. She's asking her friend
she's like,
what
I don't
they're
know.
there for.
What are we doing here?
Right.
I don't even know.
Right.
And I don't think she was from that university. She had come down on a bus from a different university. They had just been protesting somewhere else.
Right.
So, I don't know. It is funny, isn't it?
Yeah, in a way. I mean, we've seen these types of things before. It's basically like Occupy Wall Street repackaged.
Exactly. That's back when we were in college.
Right, yeah. Same sort of types of people, and in some cases similar arguments. And one of the big things, especially among, like, the conservative commentators, people are kind of going back and forth about shutting down these protests or in violation of their First Amendment free speech rights, which if they're on the college campus, and particularly if they're students, oftentimes these colleges have rules for, time and place for protesting and conduct of the protests. So I would, in my opinion, that actually would take place over the First Amendment, because they have agreed by being students that they're to follow these policies, and they're not following the policies. But of course, if they're out, in the public space, protesting, not, as you're supposed to, not disrupting traffic or, blocking the road or, what have you.
People's
right.
commerce.
Then, of course, I would agree that, it could be a violation of their free speech. So I think that's kind of an interesting debate amongst conservatives that has kind of come out of this
Well, it is
situation.
Interesting because, if it's a public university and they're just doing it out in the courtyard, so to speak, are they really preventing any, discourse or the college, their general, business, you might say? I don't know. I definitely don't support these people, but...
Sure, right, yeah. I certainly don't don't either. I think a lot of what they're shouting in their protests, even if it's not the more blatantly anti-Semitic stuff, it's ignorant stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, like that girl said, she basically admitted to being ignorant.
Yeah.
It's just a bandwagon thing.
Right. It's a cool movement, and we've talked kind of like virtue signaling. And that old Seinfeld episode, you got to wear the ribbon.
Oh yeah. I don't want to wear the ribbon. You have to wear the ribbon.
Right. Yeah. These people want to wear the ribbon so they don't get, I guess, ostracized amongst their own peers. And sometimes they're wrong. Like one of the things I was going to say that they're often chanting about is how Israel's committing a genocide against the people of Palestine, which is certainly not true at all. Because if Israel truly wanted to commit a genocide against the Palestinians, they would have, and they very easily can, because they have the military power, the air superiority to be able to, but they're not.
Yeah.
So that's just one of the things I find among many that's...
Well, and if you look at it, I mean, who's really been poking the bear? Has it been Israel poking Hamas and Gaza and Iran over and over and over, or has it been the other way around?
Right. And I was talking to somebody on the phone recently, and they had asked me about this situation. And one of the comments I made was, if you can squeeze the United States in that same space that Israel was in, they'd still be launching rockets at us. They call us the big devil and the little devil, America and Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So it's,
I've heard it put a little differently. I always liked the one, I can't remember what country he was from, but some Arab guy referred to Israel as America's Trojan horse in the Middle East.
Interesting.
I think that's interesting too, because it really shows you what they think of Israel, what they think of us, how we support each other.
Right. And, people, one of the things that are talked about is the two-state solution. We need to have a two-state solution. Well, the people like Hamas and even the people that are protesting at the college campuses don't really want a two-state solution, because one of their popular chants is, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Well, that means Israel's gone. There would be no Israel in that case. So they don't want a two-state solution just as much as Israel's not really all that interested in it.
No, it's often a misnomer. It's just their way of saying, well, Israel isn't negotiating in good faith. They don't, it's just another way of like them trying to demonize Israel. But like you just said, they're not being honest about what a two-state solution would actually look like, and what the Palestinians want.
Well, because part of the question is, okay, well, if you give them the two-state solution, who's in charge? Because the leader in Gaza was elected something more than 10 years ago on a 4-year term. So, I mean, you either have to replace the leadership, which that's gone great for most countries. We tried to do that before with certain countries, and it didn't go that great. But what was I getting at? So who would you put in leadership in this new two-state solution to control Palestine? And there's not really a moderate force stepping in to take that mantle.
Well, you might say that you couldn't have a moderate source.
Right.
I mean, that sometimes I can get callous on these things,
sure.
And this has been bantered about as long as we've been alive. And at some point, I think you just have to say, shut up, because the quote-unquote two-state solution has already been attempted. Israel already put out the olive branch. They've done it over and over. I mean, why is there a Gaza?
Yeah. Right.
So I think at some point, I mean, it's like we talked about in the last one, these things have been coming down the pike, getting closer and closer. It's been inevitable, that I think Gaza or Palestine, however you want to put it, and Israel are going to wind up at war.
Right.
I don't know why, in a way, Israel made concessions in the first place. I wonder if we'd have the issues that we have currently if they hadn't given Gaza.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting to think about. So, but to bring it back to the protests, I think that most people aren't looking at them in a positive way. I think a lot of people find them,
Distasteful?
Yeah, that's a good word. Distasteful and not very good. And I think it might or could have an impact on Joe Biden's campaign, because one of the big things he's been quoted about recently was he was asked to give a comment on the protest, and he tried to do the whole two sides thing, to find people on both sides, sort of, but in the opposite way. Because he condemned the anti-Semitic protests, but then he said he also condemns those who don't understand what's going on in Palestine or something like that, as if those are equal positions.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I don't think it's gonna play very well into his campaign if he actually doesn't take a stronger stance against it, which it doesn't seem like he's going to. And there are talks about these protests showing up at the DNC convention in Chicago. So we'll see. It's definitely interesting times. It's nothing we haven't seen before. It's like the 1960s.
Well, yeah, and if you don't mind, I think sort of the cherry on top with these kinds of things is, like that clip from that girl. Sometimes when these people come out and they just show how violently angry they are and how they don't even have a position of reason, some of them. I mean, some of them are probably informed.
Sure.
They know what they're doing. But I love how, for media outlets and small networks like us and things who are trying to get a start, they can go out and do these man on the street kind of interviews.
Right.
And you really get a peek into who are the agitators in these things. And I just love that, some of their ignorance can be highlighted.
Right. Yep.
So I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, but I also don't like it either.
Right. Of course. Yep, I mean, kind of like the old phrase, sometimes things got to get worse before they get better, and maybe these protests kind of exposing themselves will help shape what people think in regards to these issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's all I got on the college protests. We'll have to see if they keep continuing, because from my understanding, these people camping out at Columbia, they're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So we'll find out.
All right. Well, to take it over to my first topic, I've been pretty interested in these Supreme Court oral arguments over presidential immunity, talking about Trump, and how he's being sued left, right, and center. And I think the biggest thing that everybody's harping on is, the January 6th stuff. But in listening to these oral arguments, I mean, there are some good points being made, and then there have just been some absolutely silly points, I think. And if you listen to some of the liberal judges, they have asked some of the most ridiculous hypothetical scenarios, I think, of Trump's lawyers. And they're saying, well, if the president commissioned SEAL Team 6 to assassinate his opponent, would he be able to be prosecuted for that? And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, you sit on the Supreme Court. Of course he could be prosecuted for it. The point, and I love the president's lawyers for this, because they highlight the constitutional question. You know, what remedy does the Constitution provide for a president who doesn't act properly,
Right.
you know, or commits a high crime and misdemeanor?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm sure you know the answer is impeachment.
Yeah.
And that's what they keep highlighting. And some people in the media have been laughing about this and saying, the president's lawyer says the only thing you can do is impeach him. Well, yeah, because that's what's outlined in the Constitution. It doesn't say take him immediately to federal court. It says, you know, that he has to be tried through the House and the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And then once found guilty, he can be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Of course he can. The problem is that, you know, like we've seen, they tried to impeach him. They tried to impeach him twice.
Mm-hmm.
I think the second time he had already been out of office, wasn't he?
Yeah, when it had actually taken place.
Yeah. So, I mean, and we've seen that historically too. I can't quote the historical case, but other presidents have been prosecuted after they've left office too. I mean, impeached. So I just think that's interesting that the remedy's there, but they didn't win in their impeachment, either of them. And so they're trying to sidestep that and say, oh, well, we couldn't get him there. Let's try to get him somewhere else. And doesn't that sound just like them and what they do with Trump? I mean, they've just gone after him viciously over and over and over. But I think the sad thing here is that from everything that I've heard in the analysis, a lot of the analysis that's out there says that this is going to just be sent back, returned to the lower court.
Mm-hmm.
And that they're basically going to say that official acts by the president, he does have immunity, but anything he did in a private capacity, he would not have presidential immunity. And that just kind of makes sense. So they're going to put it back to the lower court, and the lower court's going to have to decide
the definition of those things.
Well, they're going to have to decide which acts were official and which acts were private acts.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting, and it's definitely not going to be done because the lower court, you know, they may try to conclude, well, this was a private act. And then guess what? The president, I'm sure, is just going to sue and say, no, that was an official act, and it's probably going to have to go back up to the Supreme Court again. And they're going to have to decide next, you know, did the lower court decide these properly?
Right.
So
it's definitely going to be interesting, and from what I've heard, it sounds like the Supreme Court is hesitant to make their own very clear decision because it has such wide ramifications on it.
Yes, that's a good point because, you know, they're afraid that the next president, whoever he may be, may just turn around and prosecute the former president for official acts he did as president. And they want to avoid that, you know. That's why they're saying, of course, there is immunity for official acts because, you know, the case Brett Kavanaugh brought up was the drone strikes that Obama did. You know, a lot of people got upset. I believe in one instance, an American, a young, like 17-year-old American got killed by President Obama's, one of his drone strikes. And Brett's asking, you know, could Obama be prosecuted for that? And I just think it's sad that we've become so politicized in this country because usually there was a long-standing tradition of presidents pardoning former presidents.
Right. And I'm glad you brought the pardoning up because one thing I heard, I believe it was Professor John Turley, was on Fox News Rundown maybe a week or so ago talking about this case. And I forget what he exactly said, but he kind of was talking about how, given that the president has the power to pardon and even pardon themselves, does that essentially give them a level of immunity?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what I was trying to speak to, well, I mean, first of all, hang on, let me back up a little bit. That was brought up in these oral arguments too.
Oh, okay.
Because there's a question of, well, couldn't the president just, on his last day of office, just go ahead and pardon himself for anything that he might potentially be sued for over the next 4 or 8 years?
Right.
You know, like let's say he was afraid he was going to be sued by his political rival.
Right.
Couldn't he just pardon himself? Well, it's interesting. It sort of is just a theoretical question because we've never seen a president pardon themselves.
Right.
So now to go back to the point I was trying to make is that usually in an effort to keep harmony in this country, we've seen the next president just go ahead and pardon the previous president, as a way to say, well, that's just water under the bridge now, because we moved on. We had an election. You have a new president. We're not, I, as the new president, am not going to act that way, the way the old president did.
Right. And
so
even more simply, I am not that guy.
Exactly. So let's just let bygones be bygones. Let's put this water under the bridge. Let's move on. I'm pardoning him, not because I agree, but because let's keep harmony in the country.
Right.
But now we've gone so far that we do sort of see this. It's like everybody's out for blood anymore. And it's like, I wouldn't be surprised if you saw, let's just say, because it's hypothetical, but Biden's administration suing Trump or, trying to put him behind bars or whatever. That's where we are in this country. The next president may very well have his Justice Department try to prosecute the former president.
Right.
And I just think it's sad. It's really sad that we've come this far. And in a way, I think it's sad that the Supreme Court won't take a stronger position on this presidential immunity question.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one. Because it seems like there is a certain balance that needs to be met, maybe, but I don't know. I'm not a lawyer.
Well, I love it because I love the Constitution, and I love that they did highlight that there is a remedy within the Constitution, and it's to do it through impeachment. Now, that kind of leads me into the next topic that I wanted to talk about, which is, this cabinet official, Mayorkas. I can't think of exactly what his position is.
He's Homeland Security.
Homeland Security?
Pretty sure.
Well, he was just impeached by the House. And what I see here and what I want to highlight is kind of like what I was just talking about, how political everything is anymore.
Right.
Because when the House sends over articles of impeachment, the Senate is supposed to take it up.
Right.
They are supposed to. It's sort of a ceremonial thing.
Yeah.
They're supposed to set it up like a courtroom. They're supposed to hear the case, brought over by the impeachment managers from the House.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like a whole trial.
Yes. Yep. But in this case, the ceremonial aspects were totally neglected. I mean, they did a few of them, but not all of them. They didn't handle it. It's like they knew from the jump that they were not going to play this game.
Right.
They didn't set up the tables for the prosecution and defense. They didn't, they basically didn't follow a lot of the ceremonial steps.
Right.
And then, as you might have figured, it was just dismissed by the Senate Democrats. Both charges just absolutely flatly dismissed.
Right.
I think it's interesting because they would never have met the 2/3 majority anyway.
Sure.
There's no way that... they technically have a majority in the Senate.
Right.
The Democrats do. And there's no way that 2/3 of the Senate were going to prosecute Mayorkas, find him guilty. So you might have called it an exercise in futility anyway, but even, somebody I don't like, Mitt Romney, he waffled on whether he was going to vote with the Democrats and just outright dismiss these, or vote with the Republicans. And he ultimately ended up voting with the Republicans because he's quoted as saying something like, I think there's nothing wrong with having a debate.
But yeah, the thing that's interesting is I saw a recent clip of Mitt Romney really giving it to Mayorkas when they had him in there for a hearing recently, like drilling him on the fact that Mayorkas said the border was closed and secure, but yet there's millions of people coming across and hundreds of thousands that we don't even know about that are coming across.
Right. I sort of loved, especially on the House side, there were a lot of people giving it to Mayorkas. And I'll just say, just as a personal aside, I don't like Mayorkas at all. There's something about him that gives me the heebie-jeebies just to look at him.
Yeah.
He's got these dead eyes, like a doll's eyes, like a shark's eyes. Some of my favorites were probably my favorite senator for these grandstanding moments is Kennedy.
Yeah, he's pretty good.
Oh, I love him. And he was really giving it to Mayorkas. A lot of them did. Because we all know that the border is not secure.
Right.
And he did lie under oath. I don't care who you are. He did lie under oath.
Right. Yeah, now that you're phrasing it that way, I'm pretty sure that's what Mitt Romney was really trying to get him on, was asking him if he had lied to the people.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and it's pretty clear. But one of the things, the reason I wanted to follow up with this story after the Supreme Court story is because I worry. And, just like I was saying in the last segment about the Supreme Court, I wish they would take a stronger issue on this presidential immunity thing because the remedy that's outlined in the Constitution, that of impeachment, I think we've seen multiple examples in our lifetime of how impeachment now seems to almost be a political tool and that it's not used the way that it should be, the way that it's outlined in the Constitution, that it should be a very serious thing, that it should be handled like an actual trial, that, the two sides should work in good faith and really scrutinize whether high crimes and misdemeanors are being conducted committed. Yes, committed. So I just worry, I think it's beautiful that the founders put in this tool. I mean, they did weigh whether or not we could have a corrupt president,
right,
or a corrupt cabinet official, or a corrupt, so on and so forth. And they figured that the remedy would be impeachment.
Right.
But if impeachment's just going to be used as a truly political tool, and you have one side or the other just flatly dismissing these charges and saying, oh, we're not even going to touch this, we're not even going to pretend to care.
Right.
I just wonder what remedy actually is there in modernity. If the Supreme Court won't take, a stance, and they won't say yay or nay, and they say the remedy is impeachment, but then you have the political actors in the House and the Senate saying, we're not going to treat impeachment the way the founders wanted us to treat impeachment, then what remedy is there?
Yeah, that's definitely a good question.
It just makes me worry. I mean, there's a certain amount of gridlock that's built into our system for a reason, but it's almost like there's so much political gridlock now that I don't think the founders would even be happy with where we're at.
Right.
Because to me, what it seems logically we've set ourselves up for with all of this hyper politicization of these things is for people to just run amok, do whatever they want.
Right. Yeah, seems like it could be that way.
Yeah, as long as you have a majority behind you.
right? I wish I had the actual quotes here, but you talking about how the Senate pretty much just simply dismissed the whole thing, and then you get the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, coming out and talking about how impeachment shouldn't be used as a political game or whatever he says. It's so galling, like he always speaks. Because exactly like you mentioned earlier, they tried to impeach him twice.
Yeah.
Donald Trump, when he was in and out of office.
Well, and
That's not a political game to Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, but this is.
Well, and I love that point because if you look at it, I mean, the Senate at that time was still controlled by Mitch McConnell.
Right.
And the Senate Republicans did what they were supposed to. Mm-hmm. We still had the trial and, treated it the way the Constitution says that it should be treated.
Right.
It wasn't just flatly dismissed.
Right. And then they followed through and they voted to
dismiss. Yeah, or acquit. Yeah, absolutely. But once the Senate's in Democrat control, it's, we're not even gonna.
Yeah, it's like not worth their time because it's just political nonsense to them.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I can come to some agreement that, kind of like yours, I mean, I don't know if this was your exact opinion, but to impeach Mayorkas isn't necessarily the thing to do. Like, I don't think they really have charges worthwhile to hold him on, but the Senate should still at least follow the procedure.
Yeah, that's really was my point,
Right,
because
okay, gotcha.
I think it's a whole other discussion maybe for another time.
Right, yeah.
But our House Republicans could be doing a lot more, than what they're doing.
Right.
They could be focusing on more serious things. I don't think I'm really super happy with this speaker that we have right now. How is this a priority? I think it's good to highlight what's going on with the border. Mm-hmm. But it's like I said, they were never going to clear this 2/3 majority anyway.
Right.
So why waste our time? And I don't like saying that because I sound like Chuck Schumer. Let's just dismiss this. It's not worth our time. But anyway, there are more important things that they could be doing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely all interesting stuff. It'll be, I guess, interesting to see how, once the Supreme Court makes their decision and how it might affect the way we, hold people accountable.
Well, and I'll be interested to see how much of a back and forth it is, too. Because, like I said, I don't think, them sending this to the lower court, to me, it just means that it's going to be sent right back up to the Supreme Court again.
At some point.
Yeah. So, we'll see.
Right. Well, my last story is not really too much of a story, and it probably won't take too long to talk about it, but recently I listened to Ben Shapiro's Sunday special with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I thought it was really an interesting interview, because most I've ever really seen was at most 5-minute clips of RFK Jr. talking about something. So it was interesting to actually hear him in a full interview for, I think it was almost an hour long. Really get to hear what he has to say. He has some pretty interesting positions and opinions on things. One of the things I think probably would have disagreed with, or I guess I'd say do disagree with the most, was his outlook on the American military and the role it plays. He really pointed out a good bit how, in his view, a lot of the cases where our American military has intervened has gone very poorly and has not been good in pretty much most cases. But I guess I don't know.
Do you have any examples of that? The first thing I think of is Afghanistan. Is that what he's talking about? Things like that, or
Yeah, not only that, I think even, I wish I had some more examples, but there were other
he
things
did
that
give examples. Though.
Yeah, he did give us.
Okay.
I'll have a link to the interview. But a few things I did kind of think were pretty interesting that I could somewhat agree with him on is like he's actually pretty critical of like the administrative state. Like the bureaucracies
Right.
having a whole bunch of control rather than the legislators actually be able to dictate.
Right.
So I thought that was pretty neat because I hadn't really heard him talk about that, and he had got into a discussion about how how he thinks he can drain the swamp compared to Trump, because one of the things he talked about was in Trump's first term. One of his big things was that he was going to drain the swamp, but yet he hires Scott Gottlieb, I believe was his name, to the FDA maybe.
Mm-hmm.
When Scott Gottlieb has huge ties to the pharmaceutical industry. And RFK's point was, people having big corporate ties like that to these administrative bodies usually have, pretty heavy influence. And, Trump putting in some of these people who had heavy corporate ties was like putting swamp monsters in charge of trying to drain the swamp.
Well, it's a good point, and it's a known issue. They
Right.
call it the revolving door, you
Mhm.
know?
Right.
So in a way, I think it's almost hard because you want to hire somebody with experience, but
Yeah, where they get this experience? Well, the private sector.
that's right.
Yeah.
And they go back and forth and back and forth.
But overall, I guess I just wanted to point out that it was an interesting interview to listen to. I thought he was an interesting person. I've not ever heard too much from him.
I like him.
Yeah, I found myself, not liking him as much as I thought I may. And I even thought to myself, and I don't have an example of what Trump could do to really upset me off the top of my head, but if he did do something to cause me not to want to vote for him, I could see myself voting for RFK, because I'm certainly not going to change my vote to Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe in voting, so.
I don't think I'd vote for RFK because he's still a Democrat at the end of the day, But there's a lot that I do like about RFK.
Sure.
Like, he will say things out loud that other people won't.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is like, I don't know if you remember, one of the more famous things that Alex Jones, got a lot of flack for on the internet was talking about some of these chemicals in the water.
Yeah, RFK was talking about that in the interview.
That turn the frogs gay.
Well, not necessarily that, but like
No, I know,
just
not
the environment.
I don't mean RFK though. I mean Alex
Right.
Jones.
Right.
He got famous for doing the whole gay frogs bit.
Right, yeah.
Well, I shouldn't say that's what he got famous for, but a lot of people know him for
right,
that,
yes.
for talking about the chemicals in the water. And I don't think Alex Jones did it very well, because
Right.
the meme that's out there is just him talking about gay frogs, not addressing the chemicals in the water that cause this phenomena.
Right.
And I think RFK's been really good about doing that, not just saying hyperbolic things like Alex Jones, but he brings up a lot of things into the mainstream, that are very concerning, that somebody like an Alex Jones would agree with
Right.
him on.
Yeah.
But he does it better.
Yeah, that was a decent chunk of the interview was RFK Jr. talking about like environmental impacts of these chemicals and pharmaceuticals and things like that.
Well, the vaccines are another
Right.
one. He's a big, I think a lot of people say he's a big anti-vaxxer because that's
Right.
how they speak anymore today.
Right.
But, he's good at highlighting the issues. And I like that a lot because it's like I said, though, I would still never vote for him, but at least he's making these waves on that side,
Right.
and bringing up these points on that side. And maybe he'll change some hearts and minds
Right,
on
yeah.
that side.
Exactly.
I like that, and I like him.
Right.
But I have another question I still wouldn't vote for him. But I have another question for you because I didn't listen to the segment. And another thing that made news about him recently was that, his family, all of the other Kennedys, came out in support of Joe Biden. So I just wonder, as soon as you said you were going to talk about this, did he address that, maybe? That his family, or did Ben
No, I don't
ask
think
him?
they really talked about. I feel like Ben tried to mention it to see if he might have said something, but nothing stands out in my mind. Him responding to that.
I was just very curious about that because when I first saw the headline, I thought, who cares what they think?
Right.
But I bet he would, and I bet there are a bunch of, what do you call it, like lifelong Democrats who that would probably mean something to them,
Right.
So anyway, I was just curious, just wanted to put that question to you.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess you could kind of look at the whole his family not endorsing him in two ways. Either he's so radical that he can't be endorsed by his own family, or they're so radical that his views aren't even close to theirs.
Yeah.
And that would be my view on it.
But it also makes me wonder, I mean, why is he still running as a Democrat? Why not an independent?
He is running as an independent.
Oh, is he?
Yeah,
Oh,
he
okay.
changed that like last fall.
Oh, well then that's my bad. I'm glad we got around to getting that corrected because, but still to me, I don't trust him. I still look at him as a Democrat at the end of the day, but that is good that he's running as an independent then.
Right.
Maybe that's why, because they're just such diehard Democrats.
Right, and they just have to endorse the Democrat, even if it's not their own brother.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, it was a very interesting interview. I thought it was worthwhile. And if you're familiar with hearing RFK Jr. speak, you'll know he's got an abnormal voice. And after 45 minutes or so, it can be a little droning to the ears, but I stuck through it. I thought it was a great interview. But my understanding is like a genetic thing, because I heard his sister, who endorsed Joe Biden, has a very similar thing going on.
I didn't hear, I'll have to look it up, but I heard somebody else making fun of, sort of poking fun at her and saying, that she had the same voice as her brother.
Yeah.
I'll have to listen to it though.
Yeah, but I'll have a link to the interview. It was on YouTube. Definitely check it out if you're curious to hear what RFK Jr.'s got to say. And I believe that's all I got for our stories there.
Yep. That's all I got.
So if you enjoyed this great conservative conversation, please follow us on your favorite podcast platform. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, and many popular platforms. And you can also follow our YouTube channel. Just search at Conservative Conversations 92. We would greatly appreciate it.
That's right. We hope you might share us with a friend or two. You can always write to us on our emails. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, we thank you for listening.